Welcome out today. I'd like to talk to you about three things that writers need to think of when they're forming and writing a piece. These three things are very important, and they can be added on to the other things that we've already talked that a writer ought to think about. The three things that I'd like to talk about today are tone, voice, and mood. For this assignment in your notebook, if you'll just identify one, a rough definition for each of those elements or words. Two, an example of each element, if you can just, show or tell of an example where you've seen that element used. Or three, some keywords that help describe the varying types of each element. For example, there are different voices, different tones, different moods. And then finally, how to build the element into writing and how to perfect that. If you'll do that for each of those elements, tone, voice, and mood, that would be appreciated. All right, let's get into it first. We're going to talk about voice. Okay? Now, this is an article from Grammar Girl, and this is a popular column about grammar. She writes a lot of good things and discusses a lot of things about writing. I'd definitely recommend what she has to say. But she writes an interesting article here about voice and tone in writing. And we're going to focus mostly on voice in here. Her definition of voice is it's this distinct personality, style, or point of view of a piece of writing or any other creative work. Okay? You may have seen the show American Idol before, wherein the judges tell people to make the song their own. And as is pointed out here by Miss Julie Wildhaber, it's important that the writer make the text their own. There's 100 different ways to say the same thing, but how you say it matters, and how you say it is your voice. And as you consistently develop the how of the way you say things, that becomes your characteristic voice. I love her example here of the Star Spangled Banner. Same song, but the difference of it being played by Jimi Hendrix versus the Boston Pops is going to be noticeably different, and that is the difference in their voice. She also uses a beautiful example here of the New York Times and New York Post, which are two very different publications in the way they handle news. One a little bit more serious and dry and formal, the other a little bit more subjective and out there at times. So she proposed that when Ike Turner died, that the New York Times had a straightforward headline like Ike Turner, musician and songwriter in duo with Tina Turner, dies at 76, which is very clean, cut, and dry and formal. The New York Post, however, went for a bad pun and said Ike beats Tina to the death, which is obviously a terrible use of the pun, but you can see the difference in the way that they've chosen to put their headline out there. And even just in the headline, you can sense the difference in voice between the two publications. Their voice is super important. It's what makes a difference when you're writing. There are authors out there that you'll probably read that have such good voice that you're always going to keep coming back to what they write. Okay? A strong voice really leaves an impression with the author. Anybody can have good ideas. Good ideas out there aren't necessarily all that distinct or unusual. However, what is unusual is the ability to express them in a way that is pleasurable and nice to read. And so that's kind of what separates them. It's important to understand that as you do this, you're going to gain power as an author as you mix in more voice and perfect and find your voice, which brings us to the next point. Let's talk about finding our voice. What is suggested here in this article is a three-step process in order to find your voice. First, you'd want to think about what you want to communicate about yourself, okay, or your business if you're writing for a business. What is it that you're trying to get across? If you talk to people, what adjectives would they say about you if you are successful in doing what you want? And if you can identify those things first, that's going to go a long ways towards getting you where you want. Secondly, you're going to want to look at the purpose of what you're writing. Okay, should your voice be different for an obituary than a movie review that says? Of course, certainly you're going to talk differently. Your tone's going to be different. So consider what your purpose is. Why you're writing has a big effect on what you're doing. And then finally and thirdly, figure out your target audience. Is this something that's written to young kids? Is this something that's written to business professionals? Is this something for, people of high education, doctors? Is this something that's written for people of maybe lower education? So as you consider those factors, you can think about the adjectives that might apply to your voice, right? And you want to obviously maybe at some point consider the things that you don't want to come across in there too. What are some adjectives that you don't want people to say about your voice? You also might want to consider, okay, so what are the other competing interests out there in this field, and how do I want to sound that will set me apart from them? Once you've got this list, you can kind of cut and chop and take down a little bit by bit what you want to do. And at that point, it's just a matter of carefully crafting each and every sentence and word choice that you make on the paper. So that's the next part, is translating it into words. Voice is oftentimes crafted by our diction or our word choice. The words we choose to use say a lot about who we are. It also may affect your sentence and story structure, and possibly your punctuation usage. If you were writing something that was targeted to teenagers, for example, using slang from Twitter might not be a bad idea. That might be a way to connect with them. However, if you were writing to a bunch of doctors, you probably want to dress it up with quite the load of medical jargon or whatnot. If you're writing to sports fans, you're probably going to want to maybe use phrases that are going to be easily identifiable for them and give you some credence and credibility with them. So that's an important thing. Now, there is a difference between tone and voice. Okay, tone. We'll get into tone in a little bit, but voice, right? Like we said, is the distinct sound of the author, the distinct style of the author. Strong, well-defined voice down here, and I love this, and we'll leave this at the end of it, is the bridge between you and the audience. It helps your readers understand who you are, and it helps you engage them and keep them coming back for more. Okay? Take 20 minutes to define your voice, and you'll never sound like bad karaoke or committee writing. So that is voice in a nutshell. Let's go ahead and move on, if we can, very quickly to tone and purpose. Okay? So the tone, as is said here, is the author's attitude towards their topic. Okay? Now, tones can vary widely, but two basic type of tones that might be good for you to know is the objective tone and the subjective tone. Objective tones are things that are reserved for textbooks, newspapers, things that aren't supposed to have an emotional context to them, that aren't supposed to let emotion enter into their judgment or their expression of the ideas. Whereas on the other hand, we see subjective tone texts, things like fiction, novels, short stories, poetry, those type of things are written with a subjective tone that uses words that help describe feelings and portray feelings and have usually a little bit better, I guess, more personable voice in them. So once again, we see tone and voice somewhat touching on each other here. As we scroll down, we can look at a couple of these statements, and they've given us 6 options from which to choose. But this first sentence here, right, the place may be shabby, but since both my children were born here while we live here, it has a special place in my heart. You can obviously see that that's sentimental. If you want to pause the video now, you're welcome to pause it and then review these things. But basically, the tone is that way that you capture the attitude towards the topic and the attitude that comes from you. Tone is something that the author has in their voice. And if you think about the tone, you know the way you talk to your parents when you're happy or you're mad or you're frustrated is different. You can say the same thing, but it can mean different things depending upon how you say it. And so we've got to be careful as writers to make sure we're projecting the right tone out there, that we're using the right words in order to get what we want. So these are some commonly used tone words, and I'll just kind of slowly scroll down here. You can take a look at them. On the left, you see the commonly used words, and then on the right, you see some maybe synonyms to them. But if we can get better at mixing up our tone and picking our tone for our purpose and our audience, then we're going to have a better effect and a more powerful style of writing. So we'll just slowly scroll down here. The last thing that I want to reflect on is that of mood. Now, mood is the way a writer describes a setting, and that's right here as we can see it. Okay, so the way the writer describes a setting, sorry, I apologize, that's not mood. Mood is the feeling or atmosphere that a writer creates for you. So this is the feelings that you as a reader are having during your reading. Okay, now mood can be dark, it can be bright, it can be scary or a foreboding mood, it can be a joyous mood, it can really vary. So mood, once again, and just to clarify, is the feeling or atmosphere that a writer creates for their readers. Okay? Now it's important to distinguish this from tone and voice. Tone and voice exist mostly in the author, right? Tone especially exists solely in the author. Voice, I guess, exists in the interpretation of the author's voice. But mood is all in the feelings that the reader gives or gets. So that's important to understand that this is mainly in the reader. Okay? There's different ways that we can do this. Obviously, in fiction, we can set up the setting as such that it sets a mood. We can use different imagery. We can use very loaded vocabulary or words that are strongly emotionally tied to things. So we can definitely do those things. If you look here, you can see different examples of that, and you're welcome to go ahead and stop that at any point you want. Different pieces have different moods depending upon what they're trying to do. And in the end, an author just wants to have an effect on you and make you feel something. Now, hopefully, they get the mood that they would like to get out of you, but that doesn't always happen. Remember, though, that the mood is the feeling that you have that's been created by the writer, okay? Whereas tone is the attitude of the writer, and voice is the distinct style of writing of the writer, okay? I appreciate you guys taking a chance to do this. Once again, if you want to do your notebook assignment, you'll need to write down for each of the elements, tone, voice, and mood, a rough definition in your own words, an example of each of those elements maybe that you've seen or read, some keywords that help describe those varying types of elements, and I kind of showed some of those, and then how to build the element into your writing. Okay? Thanks, and have a great day.